and also some cohorts. To that effect, we have eminent speakers with us. We have Professor Mridul Eapen, who is currently the Honorary Fellow at the Center for Development Studies in Trivandrum, and she's of course a former member of the Kerala State Planning Board. Her work has primarily been in the areas of rural development, employment, and gender. In the planning board, her focus had been primarily on making planning and budgeting gender responsive, gender responsiveness, and together with the team, a gender and child budget statement was prepared under her leadership and presented together with the Kerala budget papers as a separate document for the 13th five-year plan period, 2017-18 to 21-22. We from FPC, we welcome Mridul as a panelist in this session. We have with us Shruti Ambas, who is a senior policy analyst at the Center for Budget and Governance Accountability, where she leads the work on gender responsive budgeting. She's also interested in public financing of other social sectors, including education, nutrition, and child welfare. She has over 7 years of work experience in the development sector. We have Nilanju Datta from the Northeast Network, currently working as a project lead in Assam, looking after a project that focuses on good governance and state accountability towards ending gender-based domestic violence in the state. Under this project, she collectivizes and trains women and youth to track the gaps and challenges faced by them in accessing their rights and entitlement under various government programs. Nilanju has been working in the sector for the last 15 years and has worked with organizations like Jagori and HRLN in the past. We also have with us Hilda, who is of course also a member of the Feminist Policy Collective. She is the co-founder of the Center for Rural Studies and Development, which was established in 1991. She has worked in the grassroots of Andhra since then on women and child issues. She has been associated with the gender responsive budgeting since 2013 and continues to do so. Currently, she is working as the State Technical Assistance Coordinator, UN Women on GRD for Andhra Pradesh. We also have with us Amita Pitre, who is a gender and development scholar and practitioner with experience of 20 years. She works with the lead specialist gender justice as Oxfam India. She's also part of the Feminist Policy Collective. She's been a Fulbright Nehru Fellow and completed her fellowship at the Emory in US. Oxfam has worked extensively in the field of sexual and gender-based violence against women and girls. It used to run crisis support centers in collaboration with the police in the states of Gujarat, Odisha, Andhra Pradesh, and Uttar Pradesh. Amita has been leading a report on the use of union budgets for one-stop crisis centers and other violence services. She worked to develop guidelines and protocols to be used by doctors in case of sexual violence and studied the complex situation created by contradictory laws on sexual violence. Adding to Amita's perspectives, we would also have Sunita Dhar with us. Sunita is a steering committee member leading the collective, leading the Feminist Policy Collective since its inception. Sunita has over 4 decades of policy and program experience on advancing women's empowerment and rights. She has worked with civil society groups and international organizations. She's currently a senior advisor with Jagori and co-founder and chair of South Asia Women's Foundation India, a women's fund. She's also engaged with NGOs working on engendering rural women's livelihoods and institution building processes, ending violence against women, and building safer spaces for women and girls. So with this, I would like to hand over and request, request Shruti to make her first presentation. The order of presentations would be Shruti, who would be speaking on the status of the union budget, the status of the GRB at the union ministries. Shruti would be followed by Professor Mridul Eapen. I would then request Hilda as the third speaker, followed by Nilanju, Amita, and Sunita. So this is the sequence, and we would give around approximately 12 to 15 minutes to each of the speakers. Shruti, sorry, 12 to 15 minutes, but on the violence we have a understanding where Amita and Sunita would have their times divided up. So 12 to 15 minutes to Shruti. Shruti, would you like to present?
Yeah, thank you, Sona. I hope I'm audible. Okay, thanks Sona, and thank you to FPC for having me today. I'm very happy to be part of this exercise.
Shruti, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can. Can you hear me?
Shruti, can you unmute?
She has now, but we can't hear her.
Can you hear me? Okay, so Sona, can you confirm if you can hear me? The others are saying yes.
We can't
hear. They can hear, we can't hear.
Okay. Okay.
Is audible. Oh, how come we can't hear? We can't hear.
Shruti, we can't hear.
Yeah, I understand. Let me try and join
yes,
again.
we just started.
No, हम लोग उससे आ रहा है हमारा बाहर वाले से भी सुनाई दिया.
Is it working now? Do you want me to try and join again? Okay, yeah, there could be some issue there. I'll just wait for a couple of minutes for them to give me the go ahead.
Please go ahead, Shruti.
Okay, will do. All right. So thank you. I'll just quickly share my screen. Okay, so today I'll quickly be speaking on the status of GRB at the level of the union government. And to start with, of course, I mean, most of us are aware of this, but just to reflect on why we want GRB in the first place and what are the outcomes or objectives we expect from it. So we know that GRB is basically, it's an instrument, it's a tool which is part of the larger agenda of gender mainstreaming. And the idea is that ultimately what we want is for that kind of gender perspective to be built into all programming of the government from all stages, starting from planning, budgeting, implementing, and monitoring. So that is the major agenda of which GRB is a part. It's also something to ensure that we have a fair allocation of public money going towards women, which we know is not the case currently. And finally, we need to know, as the public and members of civil society, we need to know what the government is allocating towards women on a regular basis so we can track it and create accountability. So that's the overall agenda. Now, this is just a very quick trajectory of GRB in India and the major milestones that we have seen. So, of course, earlier, when we still had the 5-year plans, there was something called the Women's Component Plan. That was a limited exercise and it was restricted to certain sectors only. And basically around 30% of resources were allocated. So it was an earmarking exercise. Then we had a policy for empowerment of women in 2001, and this exercise of analyzing the overall budget through a gender lens started. There was a subgroup that was formed in 2003, and finally we had the first gender budget statement in 2005-06. Since then, every year we have had such a statement. 2007 is when there was a charter for the gender budget cells, which have now been formed in, I think around there's some 57 or 58 GBCs there in the union government. And we also have GBCs at the state level now. Then 2014 is when there were some moves towards creating more accountability around gender budgeting. So there was a gender column was introduced in the Expenditure Finance Committee memorandum. And finally, as Sona mentioned in the beginning, the broad-based committee was set up in 2019 and it has just completed its tenure. So we are still to see how that works out. Now, this is what we have done, what are the steps that we have taken towards gender budgeting at the union level. But now we want to also evaluate what is the impact and how useful these have been. So this is just some quick reflection on the union budget for this year. I'm not going to go into too much detail because I think most of it has already been spoken about in the consultation. But this is just to reflect on the fact that the union budget definitely did not deliver for women the way it was expected to in general and particularly in the context of the pandemic. So whether it was employment, we saw that the NREGA budget fell. And in general, we've seen over the last few years that there's been this shift towards self-employment and loans and self-help groups. And employment guarantee seems to have not come into focus so much. Also, apart from these, two strategies for employment, we don't see enough investment in the supporting infrastructure that women need to take up employment. And that's something that's not even come that much into policy focus. So things like safe transport, childcare facilities, and skill development, these have really not come through. Then when we look at social protection, the only thing by way of social protection for which has a lot of implications for women was the portal which was announced for unorganized sector workers, but again there's no allocation for it. We saw that the pension amounts under the National Social Assistance Program have remained the same, and they're at a very, very low level. And finally, also, there was no change in the status for frontline workers, despite the fact that it has been recommended by the Parliamentary Committee on Labour and has been a long-standing demand in general, but it is still not materialized. Even after, frontline workers did come into the limelight so much during this year and were burdened with a lot of responsibilities related to COVID, but this has still not happened. And with respect to violence against women, where we saw there's generally been an increase and specific increase since the pandemic struck, but we've not, the budget did not come through. In fact, the budget has fallen. The schemes have been bucketed and there's been a reduction. We all know what the state of the Nirbhaya Fund is, and I'm sure Amita and others will be covering that in detail. And also finally, there was a pretty big drop in the budget for the WCD. So this is in a nutshell the fact, to show that the budget was not gender responsive. But now let's see what the mechanisms for GRB are showing us. So it's really a question that whether at all we have something called a gender budget. Technically it's there and it is discussed in the media every year, and we have discussion around the fact that gender budget has increased or decreased by so and so. But what is that figure actually showing us? Not much. So this is the first limitation, that the gender budget which is shown in the gender budget statement is not even capturing what it's supposed to capture. So the figure for this year is around 1,53,000 in total, of which the larger part is in part B, which are schemes which are general schemes, not exclusively for women. And the schemes exclusively for women, that constitutes a very small part of the total. But this is not an accurate figure. There are many issues here. So we at CBG have done a sort of thorough analysis of what are the specific issues with the GBS. But I'll just try to summarize it. So first, there are a lot of schemes which are targeted at women, which are not included in the GBS. So these are schemes already in place, but not included. So we did not capture it in the total figure. Then there are a lot of inaccuracies. So sometimes, you would have the same scheme being reported in both Part A and Part B. Often this happens very frequently, that schemes in Part A are supposed to show up to 30%, the schemes in Part A are supposed to show 100% of the total allocation for the schemes, but you have a lot of schemes which have showing very low allocation. So we don't know why they are in Part A. Then under Part B, there are many schemes which either again are showing less than 30%, or they are going above and showing even 100%. So my point is that even by the design of the GBS, there are many inaccuracies. And under Part B, we have a lot of schemes which don't have a rationale. We don't know why they are included. There is some component under the Health Ministry on infrastructure maintenance, and up to 95% of the budget for that is shown in the GBS, but don't know why. There is nothing in that component which suggests it's going towards women exclusively. And also we see a lot of cases where the government does have beneficiary data. So we know that this is roughly the number of women who have benefited, but even then the allocation is completely disconnected from that. So say we have a scheme where women are availing up to, they are forming up to 50% of beneficiaries, but the allocation is still showing around 30%. And similarly, there are schemes where the guidelines have mandated that at least 50% of the funds should go for women. There are some scholarship schemes like this, but they are not reporting that. They are showing much less. So basically the figure that we are getting and the movements or the trends we are seeing in it, they are not really meaningful. They're not showing us a lot. So that is something we should keep in mind. And we also know that even if we sort of take this as a very, very rough and inaccurate estimate of what is being spent on women, the share as a proportion of the total budget has been completely stagnant for over 10 years now. So it's just around 4 or 5% of the total union budget. Just a second. Yeah. Also, we know that apart from the figures and the allocations reported, just by design, the gender budget is limited. And there are different ways in which it is limited. So first of all, we are still following a binary approach to gender. We are not reporting allocations for which are directed at trans persons. And that inclusion is not part of the policy thinking at all. Secondly, and this is a very big limitation, which is that women are being treated as a homogeneous category. And I think this came through quite strongly in I think yesterday's session, where we heard from representatives of different marginalized groups of women. Because beyond a point, it's not really that useful to know, how much is being spent on women as a whole. We do want an estimate, but at the same time, it's important to be able to see what is being targeted at different groups. And if we look at the SC and ST component plans for this year, out of those, it's a very minute proportion which is going towards SC women and ST women. So just around, I think, 1.4% or even less than 1% is going there. So that shows us that the allocations which are not going where they are needed, and none of that is being reflected here. So we are just, being asked to think of women as a homogeneous group, and that is not useful. Then another thing missing from this whole exercise is that there are many sectors in which we have made commitments, targets for gender equality. So whether that's at the level of the SDGs or some national targets, sectoral targets, but none of that is coming through. None of that is being linked to the allocations shown here. So we don't know whether these allocations are actually being used to meet those targets, and how can we monitor that process. And then finally, process-wise, I mean, this is still an ex post exercise. So the circular, it comes out with the budget circular, and all ministries are just asked to disaggregate their allocations. That is not even done comprehensively, but basically there's nothing being done at the planning stage. And it's only when we have the budget estimates that we simply have this set of allocations being reported. We don't have a proper audit mechanism. There are some audits the CAG has done at the state level, but again, there's no regular audit mechanism for the GBS. And while we have an outcome budget, and even in that outcome budget, there are gender targets, but there is no linkage between these two. So there are many schemes for which ministries have reported gender targets. There are things like X number of women will be trained, or Y number of institutes will be open to train women, but none of that is being linked to the allocations for those schemes. So given this, this is the first policy ask, as it were, that at least for the limited purpose that the GBS can serve, there are a few things, and these are very small things which can be done to strengthen the whole exercise. So the first is, of course, that we should now have an intersectional approach for GRB, and we should incorporate what is happening, what programs and services are being delivered to marginalized groups of women, how many such women are benefiting from even the general services. This should be reflected in the GBS. Secondly, we should, for all the schemes which are being included, there should be explanatory notes which link those allocations to the rationale for why it is going to women. What do the guidelines say? What are the targets in that sector? And what can these allocations, how can these allocations link? And states have already started doing that. So Karnataka GBS has a very detailed section which details why every scheme is being included and what is it delivering for women. So at least that's a start. We should at least know why they are included. Then there are many schemes which have, the scheme might be a general scheme, but they'll have components which are directed to girls or women. So for example, Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan SMSA now has the KGBVs, which are for girl students, or even Swachh Bharat has a menstrual health component, but we don't know how much what resources are going towards these. So this is really important. We need to know, at least for where we already have such components, we should know this. Then we should have a qualitative section too, because again, I think as Sona mentioned, that there are many ministries and sectors where the benefits for women are indivisible. And so we may not be able to capture exactly this is the percentage of allocations or these are the number of beneficiaries, but still we should, that policy thinking should be reflected in the GBS, that how that particular sector is affecting women and whether their needs are being met. Finally, we should link the allocations here to the outcome budget that I've already explained. And to accomplish all of this, we need a lot more capacity building. We already have the GBCs in place. So, and that is one of the mandates of the GBC, but which is maybe not being fulfilled to the extent possible, that capacity, we should be building capacity on all of these mechanisms. Apart from that, the second thing that we should focus on is that we need to start expanding the entire GRB exercise to some of the key sectors which are not yet undertaking it. So,
Shruti,
yeah. Yes. Okay, yeah. I'll hurry up now. So these are some of the ministries to which GRB should be expanded. Yesterday, Professor Ghosh spoke about the need to have a gender focus when it comes to disaster management and climate change. So that is an exercise which needs to be done. We also have discussed earlier in the consultation that we have a regressive tax regime which disproportionately affects women. So we at least need to start by having a gender impact assessment of how tax revenue is affecting women, because currently we don't even have that understanding or that data. And similarly, transport is one sector where we need to have more data on women's mobility patterns, and because again, it's one of those indivisible sectors, and but is very, very critical to women's overall well-being and women's employment. So that is another area where we need more assessments. Okay, and this is my final slide. So this is just one small point which we need to reflect more on. This whole exercise of the rationalization of centrally sponsored schemes seems to have disproportionately already hurt women and will continue to do so, because a lot of the schemes for women, or which are important to women, have been bucketed, and I think Deepa had mentioned yesterday, like we don't even have the transparency. We don't even know what is the current allocation for something like ICDS, because it's now bucketed. A lot of them will be phased out. So because the entire exercise, the rationale for the exercise is that some of the schemes are too small to continue and too inefficient. So a lot of these schemes, including things like scheme for adolescent girls, the creche scheme, these are anyway schemes which were, the allocations were falling. They were not getting a lot of uptake. So this needs to be looked at from a gender lens, is what I'm saying. The other thing is that we've also discussed how there's been a centralization in mobilization of tax revenue. The divisible pool has shrunk. So states do not have enough resources. And this is one of the reasons justifying this exercise is that it will give more autonomy to states. But the question is, do they have the resources to then make use of the autonomy? So this entire exercise, there is no, if you look at the FC report and the Niti Aayog report on this subject, there's not a lot of consideration. There's no consideration actually for the gender implication. So that is something that we should really push for. I'll stop now.
Thank you.
Now you can.
Can you all hear me? Yes. So thank you, Shruti. Thanks for that. I'll now request Professor Mridul Eapen to present her bit of the session.
Yeah. Is that big enough? The screen is okay?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really honored to be speaking here today on Kerala. Can you go on to I've titled it Going Beyond Gender Budget Statements, because we've been trying to look at it in greater depth, or more substantively, shall I say. So that's how I've titled the presentation. Now, a short introduction to understand how, in fact, Kerala was able to address the pandemic situation better in terms of both health and economy, and go beyond the GBS, and will continue to go beyond the GBS and the in the post-pandemic situation, or rather post-lockdown situation. There are two specificities of the state, not entirely unlinked, to be kept in mind, to be able to understand how Kerala was able to address the issues. One is the Kerala's historical legacy of public action, in which women played an important role. And the second is the state's approach to gender responsive budgeting. Now, I will briefly touch upon the legacy, which made the state one of the most prepared when the pandemic hit, and then move on to the efforts of making GRB more transformative. Now, in this preparedness, I'm not touching on health at all, because since Dr. Iqbal was there before me, I saw in the program, I thought he would have taken care of it. So I will just touch upon the legacy and then move on to more issues of livelihood and social protection and violence and so on. Now, what is this historical legacy that we talk about? Kerala's development trajectory has been shaped by its historical legacy of public action, demonstrating how the power of public action can improve the well-being of the people and to transform social, political, and cultural conditions in a state. The social reforms movement, based on actions of mass organizations and mass movements against social, political, and economic oppression, in which women too played a very important role in fighting for their rights, and the policy actions of governments have been the most important constituents of such public action, described by Amartya Sen as being from above and below. From the 70s itself, Kerala was lauded globally for its advances in the field of land reform, education, health, public distribution of food, and the idea of gender empowerment was embedded in these processes. Now, even when at the national level, there was a paradigm shift towards market-led economic reforms of the 80s and 90s, inspired by the Washington Consensus, with the shockingly ill effects on women, Kerala's approach remained more in terms of increasing human well-being than about economic growth, improved productivity, or technical efficiency, in which decentralized planning played a critical role. I mean, the whole entry of decentralized planning in a very serious way really helped a lot in pushing Kerala up in lots of things like education and health especially. So the state's immediate response to a crisis, why I'm talking about the legacy is, its immediate response to a crisis, whether it was the floods in 2018 or 2019 or the pandemic in 2020, is how does it affect the people and what can be done to ameliorate it. The whole state machinery gets into action, all departments and the planning board, including the planning board. The people in turn demand to be looked after and taken care of, in which they too participate. The huge community mobilization which could occur during the lockdown was the fallout of this legacy. And this huge mobilization whereby we could have teams who could actually monitor the COVID patients at home, or the people who had some signs of getting that the disease, they could be monitored in their homes, and that is why it was a big relief on the hospital system that you could actually do the containment at home. So it has its impact on the budget. Obviously, this also has its impact on the budget, including the gender budget, since resources have to be found for such urgent needs. Okay. Now, let me go to the GRB. So this is how the legacy helped us in mobilizing people, in being prepared for the pandemic when it came. The health system, the public health system, based on a lot of decentralization of the health system, worked very well on this account. Now, you come to GRB in Kerala. Now, gender budgeting, in this also we have taken a slightly different approach. The gender budgeting in Kerala has, through a process of learning, by the way, it didn't happen overnight. Every year we were learning something new from others who were also doing it, taken a much more expansive view on women's lives and roles they play not only in terms of their potential as paid workers, but more importantly, through their invisibilized unpaid work in social reproduction, their vulnerability to violence given the unequal gender power relations, and acknowledging vulnerabilities faced by specific groups of the population, including transgender people and other gender sexual minorities. However, even while recognizing the iniquitous gender division of labor based on socially ascribed gender roles and responsibilities, policy has sometimes tended to evaporate, as Moser would say, when it comes to implementation. Actually, the policy makers do recognize that it's there in the documents, but when it comes to policy formation, sometimes it evaporates. In fact, one thing which often gets missed out when we talk of GRB at the state level in Kerala is the very conscious attempt made to integrate gender into each phase of the process of level planning in the 9th plan, 1997 to 2002, through an understanding written down very clearly in the documents, through an understanding of the unequal gender relations, the primary responsibility of women in the domestic economy, their dual work burden, and their different needs. So there was a conscious attempt to integrate gender into the planning process. The Women Component Plan, which advised, later mandated the LSGIs to set apart 10% of the plan grant and aid for preparing projects that directly benefit women, further strengthened this effort. Kudubushi played a major role in mobilizing women, facilitating livelihood opportunities for them, and giving strong support to the local level governments. This experience actually can be a webinar in its own self, but I'm not going into in details here, except to signify a responsive political leadership whose commitment is essential to the advance of gender responsive budgeting, because it's very important. I think that now probably all states have recognized, and either in the finance minister's speech or in the budget speech somewhere, some announcement is made that we are committed to gender budgeting. Now, in our initial attempts doing gender budgeting, gender responsive budgeting in the 11th plan, that is 2007-12, and learning from the studies which mushroomed at the time the GBS came in the national budget, we located two main weaknesses in implementing the GB methodology on real budgets. One was that to achieve even the technical objective of estimating the flow of budgetary resources to women due primarily to non-availability of gender disaggregated data. There is one major limitation we found. And the second and more important, the absence of a broader vision of including women in the development planning process. Now, these two were something we tried to then to correct these lacunae or to correct these gaps by when we started undertaking gender budgeting in Kerala. Now, one has to move beyond, and why this is important is to understand this is you have to move beyond a special focus in the chapter on women and child to looking at women as growth agents in the state's political economy across all sectors. This would mean that within our overall approach to development of Kerala, which should specifically include gender issues. That's a very important issue, to include gender issues within your overall plan process. Public expenditure would have to be redirected to schemes exclusively for women, that is part A, and making composite public expenditure, that is which benefits both men and women, more responsive to gender concerns, that is part B. And these are lacunae which we have attempted to address in our efforts with Kerala gender budgeting more systematically during the 13th plan period. So that is why I titled the presentation as one has to go beyond a gender budget statement and an ex post analysis of the budget. Otherwise, gender budgeting will remain a number crunching exercise. Now, in the formulation of the 13th 5-year plan, Kerala being the only state continuing with 5-year plans, our priorities on gender were specifically included so that schemes, programs for women in every department can be integrated with the planning process. So, these are some of the, I'm specifically mentioning the processes because I think this is very important to be able to, what should I say, to be able to implement gender budgeting in a more useful way, covering all departments and therefore needs of women, whether it's transport, whether it's, Shruti was mentioning earlier, all the departments where we should be having, or it's irrigation, water, all these departments, we have to look at what are the women's needs and how can we actually then enable or persuade these departments to have some schemes for women in their own departments. So in the formulation of the 13th five-year plan, our priorities on gender were specifically included so that schemes, programs for women in every department can be integrated with the planning process. And what were these priorities? The thrust areas identified were skill development, employment generation, livelihood security in the light of declining WPRs of women and high rates of educated unemployment in Kerala, prioritizing vulnerable women. Since childcare, and this is the other thing which Shruti was talking about, there are other things which women need to enable them to work and to be active in the as agents of development. So childcare and lack of other basic amenities like accommodation, travel, safety, security hold women back from working outside the home. So emphasis was also put on enhancing the reach of creche cum daycare centers, elderly daycare centers, hostels and means of safe travel, basic amenities at workplaces. And the second major priority which was identified was prevention of gender-based violence, redressal and rehabilitation in the context of continuing violence in Kerala, which we sometimes call the gender paradox, the high literacy rates, high social development and so many other in health, but we have a situation where violence can be and has been high in the recent months. So now I do not want to go into the details of our priorities, but the advantage I wanted to mention here is the advantage of an ongoing GRB exercise is to fit in women's needs more easily into the budgeting planning process when a crisis comes. So, we have an ongoing gender budgeting process. Comes the floods. Okay, floods means so much of loss of livelihoods for women. Now, the government, as I said, moves into action. What can be done? We can have Narega, of course, was one of the things which always comes to mind because that's the quickest way of finding employment for women. So we start thinking of what is there, because we know these are the things which are there in the budget. What can we put more money on? So, in fact, just as in the time of the floods, in the pandemic also, a reprioritization of the budget takes place. So the planning board and all the departments, we sit down once again, department by department, and we reprioritize now. Because of the pandemic, we need more money for violence, we need more money for livelihoods, we need more money for health, and more money for social protection. So how do we go about it? And then there is, of course, a lot of heartburning because some departments have to give up the resources because that has to go to health or that has to go to social protection. So those sorts of discussions and exercises take place when the whole thing is an ongoing process. So we had more Narega, we have an urban employment guarantee scheme in Kerala. It's called the Ayankali Urban Employment Guarantee Scheme, and it's on the same lines as Narega and 100 days of employment. And this, much more money was put into this, much more money was put into Narega. Now, I have not taken the figures here, but there was a huge expansion in Narega employment in the Ayankali urban employment. Kudumbashri, in the first package that was announced by the state in the country, the 20,000 crore package, it was interesting to find that we had some money for health, of course, but we front-loaded a whole lot of expenditure, which gives money into the hands of the people. So social protection, which was being discussed, there was, all the pension schemes, 4 to 5 months pension in advance together to the people who get the pension. Then we have what are called the welfare fund boards, where there is some social assistance available. It may be 1,000, it may be 1,200, but you can, the government notified that 2 to 3 months social assistance can be given in one lump sum amount to the people. So that was another way of transferring cash into the hands of the people. Then we had, of course, Kudumbashree got about 2,000 crores out of that to be able to lend to their members to start some sort of self-employment unit so that they can earn some money. Then there were loans to women entrepreneurs through the Women Development Corporation, through the Kerala State Industrial Development Corporation. Then there's a wonderful scheme just a little before, one slide before, Sona. There's a very interesting, the slide after this. There's a very interesting scheme by the Labor Department called Sharanya. It was actually meant for widows and very vulnerable women, widows and those who've been left, deserted women, and some women who, unmarried. I mean, I won't call them, but there were women like single women who are not able to be able to manage in the sense of networks and social capital to be able to create employment and things for themselves. So there were very vulnerable women which were part of that, and it was called Sharanya, and it was giving a small amount to these people to start some sort of self-help employment unit based on what they wanted. And these units really, one had gone and monitored how these units work, and the really small amounts of money, but it gave a lot of solace to these women. And this sort of a loan was also increased during and it's a subsidy cum loan scheme. So that was very, very popular among the very vulnerable women. And so this was another thing which was undertaken by the government. Then, of course, there are departments where more money has to be given. Now that money has to be found within the budget, because we know how difficult it was to get the money from the central government. So there is a sort of some problem. I'm not saying that the process is very easygoing, but at least there is a thinking that things have to be reprioritized. Then above all, cash transfers I've mentioned already through the welfare fund boards and the pension schemes. Then, of course, there were the next one, Sona. The food kits, that became a very well-known thing. The food kits from the public distribution system, not just rice and wheat, but also about 14 items were given as a food kit to all the, and that was a universal thing actually, to all the BPL BPL also had 3 or 4 categories, and the migrant workers. That was one way in which the migrant workers were looked after. To the transgender people, it was another way that they were helped out in this situation. And so all these were efforts which were made by the government to put money into the hands of the people, and to also at the same time, to be able to look after the health issues on the pandemic front. Now, there was a drop in the budget of the Women and Child Development, but that was a cut which had to be put across all the departmental budgets. So there was about, I think, a 5% cut in the WCD, but then some construction activity was curtailed. That okay, let's not build more Anganwadis now. We'll be satisfied with rented buildings, and we can manage with that. Then we had the government's interventions on the gender-based violence, in particular domestic violence. And there was, the most interesting thing was, in the time of the COVID, every evening the CM will come and talk to us from 6 to 7. Yeah, and there he mentioned that, with the trying times for women, because of the fact children are at home, husband is home, the whole family is at home, household work has increased. The husbands should be helping out the wives or other family members should be helping out the women in the house. There were the POXO courts were set up. There was psychosocial counseling which was being given by Kudumbashree, by the WCD, by the health department, and there was the statement I have talked about. So these were ways of handling especially the psychological effect on the women because of this whole inability to provision for the household, to some extent met by the kids, but still that uncertainty was there. So that was the thing. Then the next one, I think I'll just conclude with 2 more slides. In conclusion, the other thing I forgot to say that, or let me say it now, that we talked about the unequal gender relations, but one interesting thing which came out in the COVID, that social relations can change. They're not fixed. I mean, that's not only during the COVID. I think that's what we are trying to work for. We're trying to change the unequal gender relations to some extent, as much as we can. Now, changes at the macro level can bring about changes in social relations. During the nearly 2 years and more of the pandemic, we know all the adverse things that happened in terms of livelihood and violence to women. But what was also another thing which came out strikingly was the fact of the leadership role and the women's contribution to leadership. You know, the minister or the presidents and prime ministers, and of course our Minister of Health here, how they came out so much better in fighting the pandemic and seriously challenging androcentric views on leadership and governance. I think that was a very good message that we got from what had happened. Also, what is important for gender equality is the nature of the development process. And that's where the development has to be interested in human well-being. It cannot be focused merely on the rate of growth. Now, and I conclude by saying that we are continuing with this, the type of development which we have been following with, of course, changes which I'm just going to read out this particular para. Development in Kerala will continue as increasing human well-being. Kerala, this is of course spelled out in the Kerala Development Report. It states the Kerala of the future will continue to build on its strengths in social spending, social welfare, and social justice. It will continue to use these as a foundation for further and accelerated growth in the productive forces and production in the economy. We look forward to sustained efforts to apply science and technology, modern skills and the skills available to a knowledge economy to enhance growth in agriculture and allied activities, modern industry, infrastructure, building and income-bearing services. And from this, I want to raise two issues and put it to the audience here. One is in the context of gender responsive budgeting. How do we engender higher education given its criticality in the post-COVID situation? We know that it's going to come in a big way. We have to overcome the digital divide. How do we engender higher education? And this idea this has been in my mind, but it was very nice that Paramita actually asked me this question: what are you all doing on GRB in higher education? And I said, we are not doing much, because only what we get as a small component, like a women's hostel or a canteen for a women's hostel, or the building, the wall which has collapsed of something, something which is very specifically women only we can take. Otherwise, crores of money which can be used for making campuses gender friendly and in terms also of digital friendly. That is very important, and we have to think on that issue. And secondly is the intersectionality. That question has been, it's sort of been worrying me all along. When we talk of intersectionality, we say a woman can be a Dalit, can be disabled, can be, okay, let's take these three intersections, or can be a transgender, a transgender woman. So now the thing is, each of these departments is separate. There's a SC department, there's an ST department, there's a fishing department, and there's a women department. Now the women's department cannot take on big schemes for SCs, STs, okay? It has to be the SC, ST department who does it. So that means we have to still go in a way department-wise, but making sure that each department specifies how much money they are going to give for these women who are SCs or the disability, the social justice department. Now we have to start tracking the amount of money, which Shruti also, I think, mentioned in her presentation, the amount of money which goes out to these different sections. Transgenders, we have a separate amount allocated for them. And there's also some mainstreaming in education, in housing, in transport. We had the wonderful what is it called? The Metro project, in which all women were employed, and there were, a lot of transgender women, M to F, transgender women were employed. Unfortunately, they didn't actually, there were some problems with, when you employ them, to think about other things also. Where do they get accommodation? How do people accept them? So those things still had to be worked out. But I'm saying that a lot of things were done even for the transgenders. So I know I've overrun my time, but these two things are still worrying me. We have to somehow make more resources flowing to women from the higher education department. And we also have to see how to do this intersectionality thing. Okay, thank you so much. And thank you for giving me the extra time, Sona.
Thank you so much, because we really wanted to hear from you about the Kerala experience. It was really, really enlightening to know about all these forward-looking agenda that we are speaking about in all other states. I'll now invite Hilda Grace, to give a presentation. I'm sorry, Hilda, but we are really, really running short of time. It will be great if you can wind up your presentation in 10 minutes. I'm sorry about that, possibly. Hilda, you have to unmute.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hello, everyone. It's really an honor to be speaking to you. And because my time has been cut, let me quickly miss or jump a few points. Initially, I just want to start by saying the Andhra Pradesh state was bifurcated in 2014. And so we are a new state. So all the issues of being a new state, having different capitals, moving people, moving the secretariat, all that went through. And so being in the nascent phase, let's look at what the total percentage of women are. It's 49.7% are women and 50.3% are men. And if you look at the state's women labor force participation, it stands at 21.6%. And it's a little higher than the national average. Now, let's look at what the banks, the women having a bank account or savings. Presently, NHFI says the percentage of women having bank accounts that they use themselves, which operate themselves, is 81.8%, and 86.7% are women in urban settings and 79.6% are in rural settings. And the digital empowerment has increased from 36.2% to 48.9%. Well, the area of concern also is the violence against women, where Andhra Pradesh stands. I know Amita will cover all the issues, but then just to quickly flag it is that Andhra Pradesh, the Niti Aayog's index says of 2021 indicates that 30.42 women per 1 lakh women in the state experience cruelty, physical violence by husband or their relatives during the year. Now, this is nearly double the country's figures of 19.54 women per 1 lakh women. Again, further, the rate crimes against women in Andhra Pradesh is 67.9, exceeding the national average of 62.4 per 1 lakh female population. So it's a big concern. Now, what about gender representation in politics and decision making? It's a mere 8% of elected women members to the Legislative Assembly are women. Just 5 women members from Legislative Council and 36 women members from the Legislative Assembly are represented. Whereas in the Panchayati Raj institutions, 50% is reserved for women. Now, I want to just share with you briefly the state gender missionary. The Commissionerate of Women Development and Child Welfare has the overall charge of gender equality and women empowerment with various targeted programs and schemes and institutions. Within this, within the Department of Women, Child, Disabled and Senior Citizens, which is all together in one department, and transgender included, the WD and CW department is there. Again, there are branches in the district. Additionally, autonomous bodies, including Andhra Pradesh Women's Commission, State Resource Center for Women, housed in the same department, and the State Women's Cooperative Finance Corporation, all work together. Of course, there are other commissionerate and sectoral line departments which take care of these issues. Let's look at the gender responsive commitments and institutional mechanisms. Though the work started in 2013 with government, then the bifurcation came about. And so it took some time. So when you talk about challenges when Sona is saying, so speak about the challenges. The challenges is that there should be a political will. You political will, the bureaucratic will, the civil society, active civil society, the issue taken to the streets, like which Mridul Eapen is saying, only then all these alert civil society, active civil society, not co-opted civil society or killed civil society, only then can, the gender responsive budgeting or transformational financing for women take place. Now, looking at the commitments and institution, though it started in 2013, it took quite some time after the bifurcation in 2017 that the finance minister then agreed in his speech. But then there was a bureaucratic hurdle. So it means changes in the planning system. It means getting all the government planning mechanism, finance departments and all the line departments together. So that didn't work. There was a bureaucratic hurdle. Then in 2020, the MWCD started implementing a program, a technical assistance project with the support of ADB, and where UN Women is the technical agency. So Andhra Pradesh is one of the 4 states where the technical assistance is given. And because of that project, again, when you say what should be done for transformational financing, what should be, there should be technical support. One can't dump or even, because I'm sitting even with the department, you can't ask the department to do more work. It's like, what is there to do more work, take on more work. So you need to give the technical assistance is another demand, another challenge itself for those states which don't have technical assistance. So subsequently in 2021, very recently this year, the finance department passed the gender budget circular, and it says, it's in the public domain what it says. And clearly, it agrees that it may be noted that addressing gender issues may require formulation of a specific scheme, program for women and girls. However, departments may make existing schemes, programs more gender responsive. It may be noted here that each and every sector and department has an impact on the lives of women and girls, and therefore it is felt that schemes and programs should have gender component. And then it goes on to explain, do look it up at in the public domain, it is of course. And the gender budget statement was presented in May 2021, and there was no discussion because it was during heated politics and elections were going on and pandemic was going on. So just one day, the budget session happened, and this was presented in May 2021, so late. During the budget session. The total outlay of gender budget for financial year 2021 is 47,000 crores. The percentage of gender budget to total state budget is 20.58%. The total outlay on 100% schemes targeted for women and girls is 23,463 crores. And in part B, it's 23,820 odd crores. So there are a total of 24 schemes which are reported in Part A, which is targeted 100% for women and girls. And there are 29 schemes in Part B, which lists all composite schemes, where at least 30% is allocated for women and girls. So now it seems like a huge amount when everyone else is talking about 5%, to compare to the state. Here it is 20.5%. So it means if there is a political will, things can happen. So what is that? What is that political will? In the Padyatra, which the present chief minister, when he during his election campaign, he visited all the villages, and about 3,000 odd kilometers he did a Padyatra, and then he promised the people along that, in his manifesto to the people there when he interacted, that he would take up their issues. And then he comes up with a manifesto which is covering 9 important areas, which is called Navaratnalu. And he inaugurated that Navaratnalu immediately when he took over as office. So it's the political will. And because he's implementing the manifesto, that's the 4-page manifesto, pasted in all offices. Every government office has the manifesto, and these are the schemes, various schemes covering education, women's empowerment, economically backward classes, SC, STs, agriculture, skill development, many of the social sector. So the finance minister, when he presented the gender budget statement, said women are key agents of change, and when women and men are equal, economies grow faster, less people remain in poverty, and the overall well-being of people increases. Harnessing women's potential as economic actors, leaders, and consumers result in higher levels of industrialization and more sustained growth. So again, it's the other political in the budget speech. What does the finance minister says matters, because that is where the money is coming from. Now let's look at what are the schemes. So if these are all the issues, yeah.
Can you please wind up, because we are really running short of time. So can you
In response to the growing gender-based violence, the AP Disha bill, making amendments in IPC and CRPC, has to ensure completion of trial in 21 days. The government has set up 18 police station units by upgrading existing Mahila police stations, Disha app, and an emergency SOP app for women in things. Now let's look at what are the social pensions that it has. So what does the government do? So the social pensions, as I was sharing yesterday, it covers old age persons, widow, toddy tappers, weavers, single women, fishermen, ART people living with HIV/AIDS, traditional cobblers. All of them receive 2,250 per month. So this is a big amount. Disabled person, transgender, DAPU activists receive 3,000 rupees per month. The chronic kidney patients who need dialysis receives 10,000 per month. So this is one good initiative, I feel, which other states can take up. The women welfare centers, which are set up for safe and conveniently located accommodation for working women, there are 31. This has about 6.8 crores. The Jagananna Ammavadi scheme, which is again, I said about Navaratnalu, it gives financial assistance, 15,000 per annum to the mother for the education of their children from class 1 to class 12. Again, another scheme takes care, reimburses the outstanding bank loans of SHGs. It was started in 2019 and in 4 installments. So all poor SHGs in both rural and urban, the government reimburses its bank loans, and 27,000 crores is being spent. Again, in this year also it's budgeted 6,337 crores. Then there's another scheme, of this age group, 45 to 60 years, where they say 75,000 rupees over a period of 4 years is spent, and these women are linked to different corporates, like the CSR for their skill development. The YSR Sunnavadi, again, and why I'm saying is because this issue was raised in the previous session yesterday. The interest-free loans are also given. 865 crores have been allocated for the interest-free loans, and I can share later. But then this is about, again, on the nutrition. And last but not the least, I want to share about the housing scheme, which the government units crossed is 1.8 lakh. No one has mentioned the housing scheme which we need. We need to demand for it, and for that creates more employment. There's a scheme which gives amount to the women for hostel and food to those who are studying in IIT, Polytechnic degree and above courses. And this is 10,000 per month and 15,000, 20,000 per annum. So overall, what I'm trying to say is that these schemes can be demanded for in other states. They should be, so my recommendations are that the best schemes list from other states should be taken up. The Navaratnal of Andhra Pradesh can be highlighted. There should be increase in social security. And the Swadargar Ujjwala women welfare amount should be increased, because I've been in meetings where it's very low budgets. The gender budget statement of the union budget should be revisited. Quality and quantitative data should be there. Pre-budget consultations, not only with NGOs, but with people's organization representatives, major groups and experts. And senior citizens' demands to be included. Universal income scheme also to be taken up. And of course, the CAG and sex disaggregated data is very essential. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leela. Thank you, because you just raised some of the very important areas which can be taken up by other states. And really sorry to cut you short, but this makes a lot of sense in terms of what other states can emulate. I would now invite Nilanju Datta. And Nilanju, one very strong request, and please restrict yourself to 10 minutes, because we have 2 more speakers after you.
Sure, I'll try and do that. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Just need to share the PPT.
She's on spotlight.
Yes. Everybody can see it, I guess.
We should put it full now.
So quickly, I would run through you all the Assam state gender budget that had been just approved in July this year. So our finance minister had actually table before the assembly in July a deficit budget of 566.20 crores. And here we will have to specifically mention for the state of Assam that in 2008, gender responsive budgeting was a practice that Assam had adopted, and at that point of time, only 12 departments had initiated the process. But now, if we look into the GBS of this year's budget, we see that 25 departments have actually highlighted coverage of women under the departmental schemes, and different 18 flagship schemes have been announced by the state government during the time of the pandemic and just before the election. And we will also see a special focus has been made on agriculture and other allied activities, including animal husbandry and dairy development. So now, if we look at Assam's flagship scheme program, flagship scheme called Arunodaya, which is the biggest gender-specific scheme, a budgetary allocation of 1,800 crore has been set aside for women from marginalized families of Assam. And this, while the scheme was announced in the previous year, the monthly assistance has been increased from 830 to 1,000 rupees in this financial year. Then you look, then we get this Swarnirbhar Nari scheme, where it has been dedicated to the weavers of Assam, and where the government has decided to procure handloom items directly from the indigenous weaver through Artfed and other various platforms. And the emphasis has been given on agriculture as well as on weaving, is because of the fact that a pandemic had affected the marginalized most, and the government has also gone back to the roots and trying to revive the old traditional working skills. CM's COVID assistance scheme, where the CM has actually announced 40 crores allocated for financial assistance to families who have lost one or more member to COVID-19, and as a part of it, 1 lakh will be given to the next kin of the deceased. And along with it, Chief Minister's Shishu Seva scheme, where 3,500 per month will be given to COVID orphans below the age of 15, was announced. Now, if we look at the tea garden areas, now the current budget has actually stated that that 805 tea estates have been earmarked for assistance. Houses will have functioning household tap connections, etc., where 2,69,000, more than 2,69,000 people are expected to benefit from the scheme. But on the other hand, If we look at the health facilities, if we look at the allocation made under the Department of Health, health facilities in the most tea plantations are still abysmal and workers are susceptible to treatable ailments such as tuberculosis, amnesia, hypertension, attention, etc. And no appropriate attention from the state health system has been given to ensure quality and timely healthcare services. I would also like to emphasize on the fact here that the IMR and MMR rate is quite high. Actually, it is one of the highest in the country, but no real emphasis has been given on that. On the other hand, to empower women of tea tribes, however, it is proposed to provide 3 lakhs to every SHGs for opening grocery shops in each state, which is like 1,100 tea gardens. While presenting the budget in the assembly, our finance minister had stated that the focus has been on assisting distressed women microfinance waivers, and as a result of that, to help these women borrowers of microfinance loan, the government has announced that they will provide assistance to 2 categories, where 25,000 will be paid for regular repayment of loans, and also an incentive of 25,000 will be paid after restarting regular repayment. Now, if we look at the gaps of the current budget, and we will not go beyond that. So if we look at it, we generally what we tend to see for the state of Assam, that no performance reports by respective departments of previous year has been made along with the proposal of the gender budget for current year to bring about transparency in public spending for the socio-economic empowerment of women through various schemes. There is no performance reports available, no gender audits being done to review the actual physical and financial targets in the beneficiary-oriented schemes. Like it has also been mentioned before by Hilda, that there is a lack of political will, and we can see that especially for the state of Assam. There is no specific initiative undertaken to improve women's access to services and participation of women in the decision-making process at various levels. And most of the policies and programs that we get to see that has been announced by the state government is inadequate or ill-directed policies and programs with huge focus on cash transfer. And this has been of late with the in the recent years. And women mostly are seen as beneficiaries and numbers and not as partners, because in the last election we saw a huge, there was a huge turnover of women who came as voters. So this has also been these announcements of various schemes where they talk about direct, cash transfers to the beneficiaries has become the practice. And here we also have to mention the autonomous district councils under the 6th schedule, because a few districts which falls under the autonomous, who also have autonomous council, we get to see that as a result of bottlenecks in pending fund utilization and the smooth fund flow from allocation to utilization, that there is a huge gap that can be seen, especially in these districts. So some of the recommendations that we felt that we need to emphasize is, although the MWCD guidelines very specifically talks about a gender budgeting cell, it talks about reporting of GBS, we do not get to see that much in this, especially in the state of Assam. So the reporting of GBS should be expanded to all departments, and systematic methods need to be put in place to ensure timely reporting. Departments need to be sensitized on identifying pressing gender gaps in a particular sector, because because there is no transparency, we do not know how the particular allocation of resources for a particular sector has been arrived at, so that we can address the gaps and ensure requisite funds are made available and spent well. Then there is, like I mentioned, bottlenecks impending fund utilization, which needs to be identified. Then there has to be a mechanism in place to monitor the physical targets of schemes which are beneficiary oriented, and that needs to be institutionalized, as well as adopting a rights-based approach for implementing schemes and policies for women. That's all from my side. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nilanju, for not only sticking to time but finishing before time. Thanks so much. That saves us a lot of effort. And Amita, you're the next speaker.
Yes, let me share my presentation. I hope you can see it.
Yes, Amita, 10 minutes is good for
Yes,
you?
yes, I'll try and finish before that. So I'm going to leave it to Sunita Dhar to talk about the more general aspects of gender-based violence, and I'm going to focus on an exercise which we took of tracking the union budget for violence services till the year. This was pre-COVID, but I'm going to talk about it as a case study. And here is the report which I have put in the let me just see. I think it has not got linked. Let me just so that you can actually see it. And I'm going to take the help of that to basically talk a little bit about how we analyzed violence services. Is this okay? It's on our website. I will stick it in the box later. Is it slideshow mode? Can you see slideshow mode here? Okay, I think now it is. So we all know that more than 1 in 3 women face violence, and hardly 14% of the women ever seek any services. During the COVID crisis, among the other things that happened, the Domestic Violence Act came to a standstill completely. The courts were not sensitized to looking at cases of violence as emergency cases, and there was no active facilitation of violence services. Our own gender assessment in our field areas showed that the counselors and caseworkers were really looking at more serious cases of violence, possibly because other cases were not even coming to light. So basically, we were looking at the budgets for violence services because it is a statement of intent, commitment, and prioritization of the state, and what actually is happening to these budgets which have been set up, especially the Nirbhaya budgets with a lot of hoo-ha, but also other budgets, because it's not only Nirbhaya budgets which actually work to address violence against women. So we looked at the legislative and policy entitlements and tried to assess what would be the requirement of resources for violence services, what are the current budgetary allocations and expenditures, and how do they fare. We were mostly looking at the Nirbhaya budget and the women specific schemes, and those schemes which are directly going towards safety of women, which included the police, judicial, legal aid, social and health service response, the safe cities and transport facilities, which included the Ministry of Women and Child Development, Home Affairs, Legal Affairs, Road Transport and Railways, also Urban Affairs. Those were the places where we found mostly the budgets were situated. And as of course, these, like the one-stop center, is something that is completely funded from the Nirbhaya budget, and it is 100% central scheme. Also, the Women Helpline and the Mahila Police Volunteer Scheme. And there are schemes like Swadhar and Ujjwala, which were pre-Nirbhaya fund schemes, which were also looked at. If we look at the Nirbhaya budget, we found that in 2012, it had 1,000 crores, which accumulated to more than 4,000 crores by 2019-20. And slowly it has become like the go-to place for all violence services, which actually is not in line with our thinking of gender budgets, where actually every department and every ministry needs to be looking at how they can address violence against women as part of the gender concerns. But unfortunately now the Nirbhaya budget is accounting for, from 62%, now it has moved to 92% allocation for all services for violence. In this, we find that actually the 100% of the funds are being spent in the one-stop center, 181 helpline and Mahila Police Volunteers, such schemes. But unfortunately, these go to the, these are spent from the WCD department, which doesn't get the bulk of the Nirbhaya funds. The other services have a 60-40 expenditure of central government and state funding, where again we find that the state is unable to keep up with its 40% of the funding, and therefore one of our recommendations is that nearly 90 to 100% of the schemes for addressing violence against women should actually be spent from the central kitty. That is the only way to ensure that they will reach women. And especially the Swadhar and the Ujjwala schemes are doing really, really very poorly. Now, when we say services to violence, to address violence, there are a number of acts which are actually not mere criminal acts. Like we know the Domestic Violence Act is a civil act. Then there are also Prohibition of Sexual Harassment at Workplace Act, the Immoral Traffic Prevention Act, which actually has a big component of prevention and enabling services so that women can exercise their rights. And there's almost no budget for those kinds of services. Like the Domestic Violence Act scheme, there was a central scheme which was stopped in 2015. So we find that not only did the act come to a standstill, but there's been no administrative support or any other support to the protection officers and others. The other thing is most women and child development, most women specific schemes actually suffer from poor expenditures, and that's the same with violence services. So the allocations seem to have increased 3.5 times from 2018-19 to 2021. But we find that the expenditures are extremely low. And if you look at the total allocations, you will find that only 24% of the funds approved have been utilized, though there is a steady increase we can see. The two schemes which are faring really badly, and I think Hilda also mentioned, the Swadhar Griha and the Ujjwala scheme have the least utilization, only 25% and 10% respectively. And this is really bad also because there's a circular logic. Those schemes are going to continue to get less and less funds. And actually, our study showed that it led to closure of several of these shelter homes. And in the COVID times, there were added complications to accessing, and with no construction and capital expenditure, there have been virtually no shelter homes and one-stop centers built in the last 5 years. Also, their repairs and those kinds of things are in dismal shape, so that reduces the quality of care. And if we look at the population proportion, also the violence services are extremely dismal. If we look at the numbers per lakh women, what we also find interesting is that 73% of the funds have gone to Home Ministry. In the last year's budget, this proportion has reduced, but it is not really clear whether the reduction is a course correction or what does it mean just that under expenditure led to that. But a lot of those funds have been used for forensic laboratories, emergency response systems under the Nirbhaya Fund, and the utilization has been quite low. We also see a lot of lopsided distribution. About 57% of the funds in 2020-21 went to 5 states: Delhi, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra, and Uttar Pradesh. So other states need to be actively helped to make proposals under these schemes. And a large part has gone to the police, other departments like urban development, education, health, especially health, where there has been a lot of understanding now that it is a good ministry from where you can address effectively violence against women, and that has shown zero, they have given zero proposals, and there's no implementation from their end. Poor unit cost is something else that is plaguing these schemes, and very, very low money is found to be spent on food, human resources, rents, telephonic expenses, and all this has led to kind of bottlenecks to other kinds of expenditures and services that can reach. Extremely late release of funds, especially in the Swadhar Griha scheme, was seen, and which is really leading to stoppage of schemes. The last budget, which was not included in our analysis, but also shows, like Shruti mentioned, pooling of schemes under Sambal scheme, which has also seen 10% reduction, and the child protection budget has also been severely cut. The fast track courts are showing 0% utilization, and this is pre-COVID. So what is actually happening to those schemes which are directly expected to 100% help expedite addressing of violence against women? On the other hand, there are schemes such as the forensic laboratories, etc., which will actually help a large number of crime control kind of services. So is the Nirbhaya Fund being redirected now to more general facilities, only a part of which are going to help women? We are not clear at all. So transparency is very, very required. as recommendations for COVID, we would say that sexual and gender-based violence services must be deemed essential services under the NDMA, and they should be then resourced accordingly. Data transparency is very, very important. We really did not have very reliable figures except the Women's Commission about what is the increase in violence. Then there needs to be active facilitation of services such as the Domestic Violence Act and courts to be open during emergency lockdowns such as happened in COVID, and there has to be a budget set out for transportation, concessions given, active facilitation of services. So this is a policy. The protocols for COVID tests, a lot of the exclusion of women facing violence happened because they could not determine whether the woman was COVID positive or negative and where she should be placed. So these are policy implications, but they should be paired with budget implications. And our recommendation is that population standards have to be used, because currently the one-stop center is in one per district, which we found in our communities for women to access a district level center is really, really difficult. So we should have population parameters. We have given some as indicative, like one center for 15 lakh women in urban areas and 5 lakh women in rural areas. But by these calculations also, we would need more than 1,000 additional one-stop centers with an allocation of more than 800 crores in the coming 5 years. So we really are looking at a huge requirement. So the current funds are very, very short for that. We estimated that there are about 8.4 crore women who are facing violence. And even if 60% of these women have to access services, we would need about 10,000 to 11,000 crores annually to actually reach out to these. And these should be primarily central government spent funds is something we have said in our report. Data transparency issues are there, allocations, expenditure, what exactly is and what is the proportion of these things which are going from Nirbhaya funds. More equitable distribution of funds have to be there, population parameters have to be set aside. 50% of these funds should go to Ministry of Women and Child Development, because that is where the most women specific schemes are being funded from and 100% utilized by women, and services need to go to the sub-district level. Last year, there was no funds allocated to Nirbhaya corpus, and there's a general feeling there's a lot of funds there which are not utilized, which is true, but we have to remove the bottlenecks to utilization of the funds, but keep the Nirbhaya corpus going. Otherwise, there won't be any expansion of these services. And what services are leading to 100% utilization for women, those need to be prioritized. Prevention of violence, education, health, public infrastructure, which directly will reduce violence, needs to be prioritized. Currently, we looked only at women specific schemes because there's very little, even in the safe city projects, sometimes it's not clear what proportion is going for this, and it should be done in discussion with women's organizations. Otherwise, any and every, like we found that the entire CCTV camera budget of the railways came from the Nirbhaya fund, and it is a question about how was it the best utilization of those funds? How did it help women? There should be monitoring of these kinds of services to see how they helped women, and more departments need to be giving out proposals for the Nirbhaya fund, and it should also prioritize prevention of violence services. I'll end there. The report, as I said, is there, and I will also put it in the chat box, the link to it, so everyone can access it. We are also planning to update the report. Yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you, Amita. I will now request Sunita to add to it, and Sunita, 5 minutes, probably. Yeah.
That was my request. So thank you, Sona, and I think many issues have already been raised, and I was thinking if we develop a new imagination of how do we address issues of prevention, services, support to survivors and violence, and maybe that's where the transformative financing imagination can be built. And I think we're at a crossroads where we have some lessons learned, where we have seen multi-sector efforts, where we have seen resources pooled in by various ministries and by other agencies. I think we need to take some bits of it and move forward. Because one of the things that not just I, all of us have noticed is that violence against women and gender-based violence is still being put into the domain of women's organizations or trans persons groups or marginalized collectives or SFGs, etc. And I think we talk about the principle of intersectionality, but we ourselves as the civil society are unable to break that. What have we seen? We're seeing fragmentation of data collection. If we look at the amount of research that was conducted, micro research, state research, etc., by NGOs and women's groups, we have not been able to put all our data together and make sense of it yet. When we say, where is the government data? Certainly that's a question of accountability and something that we need to work towards. But at the same time, where is our data? Why is it only branded within organizations and its micro efforts? Is there a way that we can develop a framework by which all women's organizations that are providing services can formulate common indicators and really start building national level data that makes sense and that can be put forward in time to come? I think there are models across the world which we need to see. My second point is that we know that we have experienced intense forms, including new forms of violence in the last period. And whether it's intimate partner violence, domestic violence, of course, much has been spoken about, sexual violence, unpaid care work, post and bonded labor, trafficking, witch branding, cyber violence, dowry, including dowry violence, intense forms of dowry violence in Kerala, self-inflicted violence, suicides. There's a whole lot of intense and brutal forms of violence that is surrounding us. Now, how do we respond to this? How do we ensure there's an adequate legal framework, there's adequate resources, there's adequate intersectionality and convergence and multi-sector approach? The point also remains that the government data is on two fronts that I have seen. We have seen the NCW data that has been coming up. We know the reportage. We know the kinds of categories that NCW has used to compile their data, but we don't know the outcomes. What has happened to the cases that they follow? What have been the outcomes? And I think that's the kind of data that we are lacking. Because if I look at some of the data that they have presented, and they did consider the one-stop centers as part of the essential services down the line. You have 700 one-stop centers that remain open, supporting over 300,000 women survivors during this period. Now, what does this data look like? Where did it go? What was the aid? What is the disaggregated data? And I think that's where work we need to do and look at what resources were dedicated, because special helplines were set up, special procedures were also set up, and we need to know how that can be tracked. We also know that the documentation of NITI Aayog on the SDG clearly talks about how inadequately we've addressed the issue of gender equality, especially SDG 5. I think Ritu talked about it yesterday, and there's a lot to be done. Oxfam study, and I know that Amita has presented very good data, but the Oxfam study last year says that India is spending 30 rupees per woman or girl annually to address gender-based violence. And for 80 million women and girls who suffer sexual violence, there's an investment of only 102 rupees per head. So we can see how pitiful, really the investments are. Now, when we look at a global scoping study by Equality Institute in 2019, they estimated that for prevention in the last 5 years, in the 2019 studies I mentioned, approximately USD 2.042 billion, which is less than 0.002% of overseas development aid. So even at a global level, the investments are very, very meager. An interesting report that we need to see as FPC and the women's organizations, to which Jaguri contributed as well. The director was there, presented a testimony. We also put in our report, is the department-related Parliamentary Standing Committee on Home Affairs. That is the latest report on atrocities and crimes against women and children, which was released in March 15, 2021. I think we got hit by the second wave of the pandemic so much that we have not deeply analyzed this report. It has data from across the states. from certain civil society groups, and it talks about the role of MHA in taking forward certain agendas where I think our interest now, attention now needs to go to, whether it's the national database on sexual offenders, whether it's the emergency response support system, certainly on NCRB and Bureau of Police Research and Development. What are these institutions doing? How are we going to be impacting them to be collecting data, et cetera, and also looking at what happens to certainty of convictions, fast-track courts, medical forensics, representation of women in police. We have groups that are talking about police reforms, but we are not going there significantly. And some of the studies that Jaguri did earlier, some of this data with CBGA, we had looked at the fact that representation of women in the police force, in the transport, in the other sectors is very, very low and needs to be worked at. Now, I'm also thinking there are help desks and there are gender desks. NRLM has gender desks at district level in some of the states. There are help desks in the health sector. There are gender desks that this model and other models are there. How do we bring all these desks together so that at the end of the day, not only information about access to rights and entitlements, but also access to services can be provided? And I think we again are very fragmented at the level of communities, whether urban, rural, or tribal. The other thing that I did want to bring to our attention is the work that's being done by Generation Equality. There is an action coalition on ending gender-based violence, which is one of the 5 action coalitions that's a follow-up for Beijing +25. And they have critically looked at issues of prevention, of financing, transforming gender norms, law and policy reforms, intersectionality, but basically looking at systemic change. And I think that's where our attention needs to go to. How do we work on making the systemic change and having the system respond to issues of discrimination, violence against diverse women, trans persons, children, and those from non-binary and other sexual identities. I also want to say that they are looking worldwide for investment that would increase by $500 million by 2026 for prevention. We do not know in our investments how much goes for prevention, how much goes for services, how much goes for outcome budgets. And I think those are areas that we need to be looking at. Last but not the least, I think we need to be also advocating for ILO C-119. Government of India has not ratified it. It is something that we have to work on, harassment at the workplace, which we have to work on to start connecting the dots. And I think until we connect the dots, if we only look backwards, we will probably not pay much for this. We must take the lessons moving forward, because in the action coalitions, just during the period of their conferences, they were pledged over $40 billion for gender equality. And I think where is this money also going globally, and how do we make sure that investments to women's groups are made adequately? And there was a study that Lawyers Collective did many years ago, funded by the UN Trust Fund, and they basically monitored the implementation of the DD Act. I think it's time to start monitoring the implementation of the Act, Sexual Harassment Act, rather than looking at it in activities. Look at the Act, look at a much more macro database, and see what we can do to redesign implementation structure and partnerships. I will end here.
Thank you. In fact, moving on comment.
Thank you.
One sentence I wanted to add on. Is when you were talking about sexual harassment in the workplace, also you're talking about connecting the dots. There's another dot which is your labor code dot, which redefines workplace, redefines worker, and therefore redefines sexual harassment. That you're out of that because you're not a worker anymore. So it becomes domestic violence and not harassment at work.
And also look at programs like the National Rural Livelihood Mission, where the integration of addressing issues of violence against women have found space.
Yes, I have to be the bad cop to end the discussion here. I know Renu also wants to come in, but I really request that we stop it here. We have overshot the time by 30 minutes. And I just want to end by one last thing that I want to highlight. I mean, this violence, bringing in violence into this session of GRB was important to understand the importance of gender responsive budgeting when we look at sectors separately, individually. But I think one of the important things that came out from Professor Eben's presentation, and also with Hilda's and Nilanju's ones, that if you have a continuous way of capacity building and awareness generation within the planning processes and systems, it actually gives rise to a much better way of gender responsive budgeting over the years, rather than having a very ad hoc approach. I think Hilda was one of the speakers who commented on the lack of technical capacities at the level of the states, and the importance of state technical assistance, which is being provided externally. I think many states are undergoing this. It is either Women or ADB or the World Bank providing this state technical assistance for capacity building. And I think there was a point raised by gender budget cells in some of the union ministries. They already have the cells, but they are more merely non-functional because of two reasons. One, the capacity building has not happened, and two, there has been transfers. So new people come in, their capacities need to be built around that. And these are very institutional and issues that need to be addressed for proper rolling out of gender responsive budgeting within the states, also in the ministries. So those are things I'm talking about, these mechanisms, strengthening these mechanisms, because it is core to implementing what we want, and all the systemic issues that the violence discussion has thrown up to us. And I think these would be taken into the recommendation session. We would be discussing all of that. And very sorry to the audience for not being able to have a discussion. But I think if we have very interesting comments, we will take those in the session after lunch. Thank you so much. And we come back at 2. We have 30 minutes. We'll have 30 minutes for lunch, and we come back at 2. Sorry to cut down on food time.